Welcome to Telltales. I'm Mike Nicoletti. Every week, along with my co-hosts Jason Wallace and Hunt Lawrence, we bring you the Cash Flow Memo. Get it at telltales.us. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to dive deep into energy, technology, and healthcare. So download the memo now and get started.
The following conversation is intended for informational purposes only. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you.
We're going to be very quick on the three exhibits because there's not much change from last week. I don't think Russian sanctions are too likely, but you can't rule them out. I don't think Iran will agree to negotiate with the U.S. on sanctions, but there is rumors that some type of negotiation is underway. So the oversupply of oil is not likely to be reduced by sanctions. So oil's a bit vulnerable. On the other hand, clearly Russia is not in any particular hurry to get a ceasefire going in Ukraine. So it's conceivable that you can't rule out sanctions. Iran is a very volatile situation because the clergy doesn't want to negotiate with the U.S. where the elected government does. So a lot of uncertainty. On the second page on natural gas, Exhibit B, these are new numbers. There's a little more production. Interestingly enough, a little less gas used per power, which is showing up in the numbers. Everyone says data center, but I think power demand is pretty flat. I'm going to try to do some work on that in the next week or so to confirm that or get down on one piece of paper. The big difference on Exhibit B is the LNG demand is up a full 2 Bs or B and a half, and that's coming through in the numbers. Part of it is Venture Global getting in operation faster or getting up to capacity faster in Plaquemines Parish, and then Cheniere at Corpus Christi. The gas price is great. You can see down at the bottom, the 25 price for the full year is $4.40. The 26 price for the full year is $4.40. We're going to be talking a lot about Exhibit A as the House moves to increase the debt ceiling. They're on a continuing resolution for the rest of the year. So how to find $500 billion of spending cuts is what we talked about last Wednesday will be delayed, I think, till they start working on the 12 expenditure bills that everyone hopes they're going to be able to pass this year for the first time in about 3 decades. But there will be talk about spending because of the bill, which will extend the tax cuts and raise the debt ceiling. So there'll be a lot of talk of spending, but the actual work to take our spending from $7 trillion or $6 trillion after $1 trillion, allowing for $1 trillion of interest, that work will be later on, I think. With that, we promised at the end of last Wednesday to talk about Apple. There's certainly plenty of news on Apple. They're going to have a developers day, I think, in June. They're admitting that not much progress on AI. One of the Apple bears, or at least skeptics about Apple's ability to deal with AI, is Jason Wallace. So you get the mic first, Jason, on Apple.
Yeah, so they've replaced the director of the Siri program with the gentleman that ran Vision Pro, so their VR headset. And they've had some all-hands meetings, and of which like the minutes of that have leaked. So they're kind of in a little bit of a panic mode after coming to the realization that they won't release a really generative AI version of Siri until probably 2027. So that leaves a lot of leeway for the competition to come in and develop something compelling in the meantime. We know that there's at least 2 AI first smartphone projects in the works that are not public ones led by Sam Altman at OpenAI, along with Johnny Ive. So switching the leadership of the Siri team, the AI, the Apple Intelligence team, is a big step. But the person leading that is who came up with the Vision Pro concept and the marketing around that and the launch, which hasn't gone well. So overall, they had to do something, but I don't think they've made a killer move there. And just in general, the software products have been a little lacking in the last couple of years. Mike actually upgraded his MacBook a few months ago, and he's having a lot of software issues, and he can speak to that. But I hear him talking about his Mac in a similar manner that we used to talk about PCs in the past. So.
Well, it's not that bad. I mean, back then you lost work and it crashed and whatnot. But yes, our expectations are higher for Mac products than versus what's being delivered. The flip side, I should say, there are a handful of negative things. The flip side is that the company has not blown a bunch of cash on AI yet. Granted, they did just place an order for a couple $1 billion worth of NVIDIA servers from what we heard. So they are starting to do stuff. But compared to the other companies, they haven't invested. And what we learned from DeepSeek, or at least what we're seeing from DeepSeek, is open source models are being able to keep up with the frontier. And those innovations are going to make it easier for Apple to implement AI. The question is, how do they do it and how do they monetize it? And if I would be pretty bullish about Apple if they came up with a platform strategy for AI, a way in which you would access other models through the iPhone. But so far, I agree with Jason, it seems like they're sort of flailing when it comes to putting together a cohesive strategy.
Yeah. And after dogging on them, I'll say that their vision for what Siri should be and what I hope it is one day is a pretty grand and very difficult to achieve vision. On the surface, it sounds relatively easy. They're going to have this Apple Intelligence layer that you could interface with Siri, verbally ask it questions, and it's going to take actions on your behalf, such as sending emails or payments even, or anything else that an app developer plugging into the Siri system would allow. The complication there is security. So Siri then has access to all of your email, your contact lists, potentially your bank info through your banking app, any information that's shared through any of the apps on your iPhone. So a very powerful tool, which we don't know how to secure. We don't know vulnerabilities in AI systems. We don't know how people will inject malicious commands into the AI yet. Very hard challenge.
Yeah.
They promised it without I'm maybe realizing that.
Well, they might have realized how difficult it was, but it may force them to go back on a stance that they've previously taken a very strong stand on privacy and security. And if they have to walk back some of that in order to implement these features, they're going to look pretty disingenuous.
True.
And for clarity, it's because in order to open up Siri to communicate programmatically with APIs or the various apps, you're just inevitably going to have more security vulnerabilities. And if you tighten it too much to the point where you can't do very much with it, then somebody else is going to win because they'll come up with something that is more extensible, better integrated.
And this is where Google has an advantage because they have more of those tools within the Google, the Alphabet ecosystem.
Well, tools that people actually use, right? Everybody,
right.
If you're on an Android phone, you're probably using Gmail, you're probably using Google Calendar, you're probably using Google Docs. So all of that stuff, they basically can make it work for themselves internally. And then later, I don't know that many Apple users that actually use regularly Apple Mail or any of the other Apple workplace products.
So is Jason going to get a Samsung?
I have reluctantly decided to get an iPhone 16, but I haven't yet because not excited about it.
I think he's holding out for the Johnny iPhone.
Right.
If and when that comes out, yeah.
Right. There was a Wall Street Journal article in the print version today about the Signal software that has made so much news because of it being leaked or picked up by a reporter. According to the Wall Street Journal article, it's owned by a nonprofit, and it is considered to be reasonably secure. What else, other than sitting in a room with, underground someplace, totally secure, what else do government employees or intelligence and Defense Department employees have to communicate with each other that is unlikely to be listened to or hacked or what have you? I mean, is Signal all there is? Jason, now you used to be in the line of work.
Yeah, I've sat in those basements with no windows and special phones. Signal probably is the best app for secure communications that we have commercially available. So you're right. You bring up a good point. There's these secured facilities that you go to communicate. They're hard to get into. Obviously, there's a lot of layers of security there. And once you're in there, the tools are not that great. It's hard to make these communicate. So the first job I had that placed me out in San Diego here, I had to seek out special offices that had these facilities in them just to check email and make phone calls. And it took hours. I had to drive somewhere, sign in with this company that I didn't have an otherwise affiliation with and have them make sure that I was approved to go in there. It was a lot of hoops to jump through. So these are cabinet level officials. They're doing other things. They're not locked in these rooms with no windows all day. So they have to have a way to communicate. And the government does have devices where they can use to do this. But Signal is end-to-end encrypted, which means no one else has the keys to decrypt those messages other than the recipients. It's a very secure app to use. The problem is what device were they using it on? I don't think anyone really knows now. They certainly do, but if it's just a normal phone, that has a million vulnerabilities. The government does provide these people with more secure mobile phones. So hopefully it was at least on one of those.
There's the concept of a SCIF. That's what they call these rooms that they're supposed to do these secure communications in. Made a lot of sense when all communication was done by landline, whether it was a telephone hooked up through a landline or through a computer hooked up through a physical line. In the modern world, they're no longer effective and, in fact, create more security vulnerabilities as a result. So in one sense, the government really does need to move to a more modern communication methodology. Officially, at least according to the Stratechery article today by Ben Thompson, officially they're supposed to be communicating on Microsoft Teams, which is not end-to-end encrypted. And
there's a reason for that.
Well, right, exactly. So it's supposed to, all these conversations are supposed to be discoverable. So if you're a cabinet level official, all these conversations are supposed to be pushed up into some sort of official record within 20 days of happening. And this has ties back to the corporate world as well. Because of record retention policies, all your emails and everything need to get stored for a certain period of time in case your company gets sued, and then they want to be able to discover some of these communications in the discovery process. And I hear stories about these quite a bit because a company will get sued, and then we've seen it as recently as the Apple Google antitrust case about the Apple payment. All these emails get surfaced, and they can be made to look very bad in a legal setting. So what is the net effect of making all this information discoverable? It reduces communication, and it discourages people from surfacing alternative opinions. And in the case of a large organization that's already going to be prone to groupthink, or you're likely to end up with worse outcomes. The federal government has it even harder. And again, these are the rules that we've wrapped around it. And this concept of having full transparency is a feature in one sense, but it is a negative thing in another. So it's not surprising that government officials have adopted alternative means. It wouldn't really make sense for the government to go purchase something similar to Signal because it's available for free, and you wouldn't come up with a different solution. The solution would be the same. So presumably that's how the decision set goes. I bet one of the people on that chat is responsible for uploading the conversation into a secure government file store. But again, that breaks this whole concept of like having encrypted communications, because once you could get in there, then it's all available.
And I think it brings up the question of what communication should be stored. We didn't store records of phone calls.
We still don't.
But we keep emails. So
right.
where does a texting platform fit in?
Where does an SMS fit in? Because an SMS is extremely insecure. It's not secure.
We're prone to this type of thing then. Now you're supposed to make sure you don't have an unauthorized person on your string of, it doesn't sound as though it's logical to have people who need to communicate to be in the same underground room. It doesn't sound very logical that rather than traveling about, you have a secure facility wherever your office is, and you disappear into that facility every time you want to communicate with your colleagues.
And when you're in those facilities, you can't have devices that communicate to the outside world either.
Yeah.
So you're cut off from the other source of data.
Yeah. So some of the publicity about this, or complaints and whatnot, sound a little overdone.
Okay, let's take a quick break for a message from Oak Cliff Sailing.
Good morning, everybody. It is your weekly update from Oak Cliff. Today is from the top deck of the Henlopen, which is a cross-sound ferry that one of our graduates actually worked on the design of. It's the only one with a deck up top with a lounge and a couch, which I have been known to sleep on before. But we're just coming through the gut here, and I've been up in Newport, Rhode Island, where we were filming some of the footage for an upcoming documentary on the America's Cup, specifically women in the America's Cup. So I've done 4 of them. I'm a little bit of it, but it was great to see people last night at the cookhouse, and David Ray bought everybody champagne, which was a nice touch. And now we're back to work. While I've been up in Newport at Oak Cliff, they've been working on getting all the Match 40s in the water. The art show is coming up a week from this Saturday. We'll be hanging today. So all of you artists, if you haven't dropped off your art, do that. If you are looking to purchase art anywhere in the world, we will have that up online at oakcliffsailing.org next week. And it is a beautiful, almost spring day in Long Island Sound. See you soon. Remember, Oak Cliff Sailing, your place for everything sailing. Trying that one out.
And now back to the show.
We've been allocating about 5 minutes every Wednesday to healthcare. Why don't we try to do the remainder of our 30 minutes on healthcare? I happened over the weekend to update the page that includes Lantheus and Vertex. And I must say, these seem like awfully quality businesses and well-positioned. All healthcare is at some risk with reduced Medicare spending and probably some reduced Medicaid spending. The problem, if we refer back to Exhibit A, you have to, if you're going to take $500 billion out, at least a couple of $100 billion has to come from government involvement in healthcare through Medicare and Medicaid. But despite that, there are some pretty good cash flow businesses, and Lantheus and Vertex Pharmaceuticals are really very sound from a cash flow point of view. And I thought we'd have Mike pick one. Let's say Mike first, because Jason is a healthcare person. So Mike first, on whether he wants to pick Lantheus or Vertex Pharmaceutical, and then Jason gets the second one. So for the remainder of the time, Michael take his choice and then leave 3 or 4 minutes for Jason to explain why he thinks his choice is better. So over to you, Mike.
Oh, this is a tough one because these are two of our favorite healthcare companies. I'll talk about Vertex. This is actually the same company I talked about at the ValueX conference earlier this year. Most of these pharmaceutical companies, the reason they can make unnatural profits, right, and not have them competed away by competition is because they have IP, the patents that protect the drugs or the diagnostic or whatever that they sell. So that ends up being a nice business, but it also becomes a treadmill, meaning every time you have a hit, you have to have a future hit that is not just as big, but greater than what you had in the past. And we believe that creates a lot of misaligned incentives for the leaders of these businesses when it comes to capital allocation. You see, maybe some examples would be a couple of the majors are making very big acquisitions. Bristol Myers Squibb, some of the others have big patent cliffs coming up. And as a result, they end up going out and buying a bunch of companies. And that's fine if they have a competitive advantage in distribution, which maybe the majors, that's the majority of or should be the majority of their competitive advantage. But since the companies selling to them know that, they can capture most of the value. So that's not really where you want to invest. So we spend a lot of time trying to dig into companies that do a really good job of running the whole process or making the capital allocation decisions as appropriate. And we found Vertex mainly because we took Hunt's approach to looking at oil and gas exploration companies and said, hey, what if we could find a pharmaceutical company that spent less than 50% of their cash flow on R&D? Because if you think through, to really simplify the process, a pharmaceutical company spends money on R&D, that R&D creates a product, and then once the product's in market, you have some SG&A involved with maintaining the sales force that's required to sell it and whatnot. But the rest of it is far more simple and predictable than the R&D line. So you look at Vertex, and if you've got page 15 open in front of you, you can run down the line there and you see that they spent $3.6 billion on R&D and their cash flow is $3.6 billion. So that kind of stuck out to us. And as we peeled back the layers of the onion on Vertex, we found some really interesting things. And the most unique thing that we learned, I think, Jason might differ, the most unique thing we learned is that the company almost died very early in its life. Well, early, 20 years into its life, but right after its first product came to market. The first product they brought to market was a hepatitis treatment, and it very quickly became a blockbuster, $1 billion in revenue. And inside of 12 months, it dropped to zero. And the reason it dropped to zero is a competitive product came on the market that was significantly better. Fortunately, they got extremely lucky because they had an R&D program that was being funded by the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. They got lucky again because Obamacare went through and there was funding to pay for these drugs when they came to market. So they got this drug into market for cystic fibrosis. And this time, instead of resting on their laurels and saying, hey, we got a hit, they had a lot of pressure from the CF Foundation to continue to reinvest that cash flow in CF. And they did. And what's happened over that period of time since 2012-ish, the long story short is someone with CF, their life expectancy is now about as long as a healthy adult, or the national average, I guess. So it's been incredibly effective, and there's really not much competition in the CF treatment space. So the company now produces enough cash flow that they can invest across the board, really in early stage research, knowing that it takes a long time to get through. And as we've talked about before, their pain drug, which there's no alternatives in pain to opioids, nobody was really willing to invest in it because opioids were so effective. These guys saw something, decided to invest in the early stage research, and now there's a public demand for a non-opioid painkiller. And we know for a fact, they've talked about it, that they haven't stopped with the first version of it. They've got a second version that's in the works, and they intend to build a franchise out of this pain program as well. So we think that's a sign of a high quality company. And at the end of the day, we want to buy really great businesses that are going to be here for a long time because we want to be lazy, ideally. I mean, we want to buy a company and sit on it and not sell and just let it compound. So that's why we really like Vertex. So Jason, good luck with Lantheus.
I didn't give Jason a head start. Vertex, if you look at page 15, is trading over 30 times free cash flow, and Lantheus is trading at like 13 times free cash flow. So you've taken up more than your half of the time. But yeah. Jason, let's start because it's a much lower valuation. So over to you, Jason.
Yeah, and the question is why? So Lantheus is a radio diagnostics business. And what that is a radioactive isotope. You can attach it to a molecule or a protein that then binds to something you want to image within the body. And then in a PET scan, that the radioactive isotope marker will kind of light up that scan. So you can easily see the parts of the body you're trying to image. The business that Lantheus is in is imaging prostate cancer, and specifically metastatic prostate cancer that's spread throughout the body. They spend less than half of their free cash flow on R&D. They run it much like they're running a business and not a biotech. The reason it's trading at a lower valuation is that line of business is kind of stalled. So they've saturated the market for imaging metastatic prostate cancer. They haven't seen very much growth there in over a year. Why they'll see growth is there's a couple treatments in the works that are radiopharmaceuticals that will treat the prostate cancer that's not metastatic. So the requirement today is if you receive a radiopharmaceutical for prostate cancer, it is metastatic, and you had to have one of these radiodiagnostic images taken. So if they're going to use those treatments in a much larger percent of those patients, they're going to use a lot more of these radiodiagnostics and potentially use them more frequently for follow-ups as these men live longer. The optionality in Lantheus comes from a portfolio of diagnostics that they've largely purchased to image Alzheimer's, to either amyloid beta plaque in the brain or tau protein tangles. So they have a couple diagnostics in clinical trials and being used in a large number of research for treatments as well. So that their diagnostics have been purchased by the pharmaceutical company or the biotech that's coming up with the treatment as a way to image and show progress in their treatments in the clinical study. So it's being used in a lot of trials. And if these treatments start to get approval, this will be the way that you diagnose and monitor treatment for Alzheimer's as far as it relates to the plaques and tangles, which could obviously be a quite large amount of business.
There are also moonshots here. A moonshot would be using the diagnostics to monitor Alzheimer's. But if my memory serves me correct, there's a moonshot in Vertex Pharmaceuticals too on type 1 diabetes, which is very, very early stage. But I remember when Jason mentioned this so many months ago, and I think Jason, I think the trial was in the UK and there are only 12 patients, but that has been accelerated. I think what the goal is to have a type 1 diabetic, so this is, inherited diabetes, be able to go without insulin for a full year. Or have I scrambled details there, Jason, or what?
No, you got it. Yeah, it was when we started talking about it, it's exciting, but it was phase 1, so it was very early. And they did find that the endpoint was are they insulin free 12 months after treatment? And 11 of those 12 patients were. So it quickly got pushed to a phase 2. And then the FDA agreed to push that same study into a phase 3. So it's been one study that's continuously running, and they just enroll more and more patients. So I believe they're going to enroll close to 60 patients. So that it really pulled forward the timeline for when this treatment could come to market. But like Mike said, they want to build franchises out of these. They want to out innovate everyone. This is the first of 3 versions of this that they're studying. This first one requires immunosuppressants with the transplanted stem cells, so your body does not reject them. The next versions will have kind of a medical device to encapsulate those cells so that it hides from the immune system, and you won't need immunosuppressants. So that initially, the people that have very, very severe cases of type 1 diabetes they'll look to get this, or maybe they've already had transplanted cells or some other treatment that requires them to already be on immunosuppressants. They would be clearly the first adopters of this one.
Now, to be fair, in closing, the pharmaceutical industry and biotech industry is littered with things which show enormous promise and then don't work out as the trials progress. And in evaluating this, you'd have to put I don't know, what do you think, Mike and Jason, a 1 in 3 chance or something that this would come to fruition?
Our goal would be, if we can get comfortable with the revenues a company currently has at 20 times free cash flow, like in the case of Vertex, we can get really comfortable because of the franchise value of CF.
Right.
So if you can value it based on that and buy at 20 times free cash flow, if the multiple is higher than that, then that's what you're paying for the optionality of those programs. So our goal is to buy that optionality as close to zero as we possibly can.
Right.
And I think when we entered Vertex, it was 22 times cash flow or something like that.
Right. And you have 2 shots of very
more than 2. I mean, so that's the nice thing. I mean,
you made your case.
Yeah. Sorry, I would beat a dead horse here, but they spend $3.6 billion in R&D. Look at the productivity of that $3.6 billion and compare it to Pfizer's. They're not even comparable. And Pfizer spends 11.
Good. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do, because there are other healthcare companies. There's Harrow. Next week will be a little unusual. We'll do exhibits C, B, and A, and then we'll start with healthcare. So, because we probably have some more points to make about Lantheus and Vertex, and then we have Harrow. So we will be here 7 days from now. In the meantime, everyone be well and stay healthy, and we'll see you in 7 days. Take care.
The views expressed on this podcast are the hosts alone and do not constitute an offer to sell or a recommendation to purchase or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security nor a recommendation for any investment product or service. While certain information contained herein has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, neither the hosts nor any of their employers or their affiliates have independently verified this information, and its accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Accordingly, no representation or warranty, expressed or implied, is made as to, and no reliance should be placed on, the fairness, accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of this information. The hosts and all employers and their affiliated persons assume no liability for this information and no obligation to update the information or analysis contained herein in the future, and may or may not hold positions in the securities mentioned.